In this video, I will tell you the real story of John Dillinger, exploring how he rose to become public enemy number one with banks and simultaneously a national hero for everyone else. I'll uncover the critical mistake made by Dillinger, which was not shown in the film but led to the formation of a special FBI task force to hunt him down. Furthermore, we'll examine the intriguing events of 2019 that cast doubts on the official narrative surrounding Dillinger's death. John Herbert Dillinger was born on June 22, 1903, in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana. Unlike many other bandits who viewed crime as a social ladder, Dillinger didn't hail from poverty. This detail is notably absent in the film, perhaps to uphold the romanticized portrayal of Dillinger as a modern-day Robin Hood. While his family wasn't akin to the Rockefellers, his upbringing was comfortable. His father, John Wilson Dillinger, was a prosperous businessman who owned a grocery store and some real estate. Tragically, Johnny's mother passed away when he was a mere 3 years old, leaving him to navigate much of his childhood without guidance, as his father was absorbed in his business pursuits. In the film, Dillinger recounts that his father was a tyrant, stating,
"My daddy beat the hell out of me because he didn't know no better way to raise me."
The real John Dillinger often regaled journalists with similar tales, emphasizing his father's favorite saying, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." However, Dillinger neglects to shed light on the tumultuous nature of his upbringing. Although his father did not spare the rod, he did pay for John's schooling along with his two siblings, a privilege not afforded to many in the early 20th century. Dillinger frequently skipped school and found himself in trouble with the law due to fights and petty thefts. Furthermore, neighbors later revealed to journalists that Dillinger, during his teenage years, delighted in tormenting younger and weaker children and displayed cruelty towards animals. However, it's worth noting that accounts of Dillinger's early life may have been tainted by his later criminal exploits, so the extent of his cruelty towards animals remains uncertain. Whatever the situation was with cruelty to animals, it was well documented that at a young age, Johnny formed his own gang and was involved in group sexual assaults. Additionally, he was caught stealing coal but escaped serious consequences due to his age, as he was under 16 at the time. You probably already noticed a slight inconsistency. How could a boy from a well-off family resort to coal theft? Well, young Dillinger used this act of rebellion to express his disdain for his father. But how did his tyrannical father react? Dillinger's father, convinced that the city environment was corrupting his son, made a drastic decision. He sold his business and all their belongings, relocating the family to a remote farm in the countryside, hoping that rural labor and distance from the corrupting city would have a positive influence on young Dillinger. In 1923, at the age of 19, Johnny stole a car just to impress his girlfriend. Dillinger was promptly arrested, but his tyrannical father intervened, securing his release. However, the relationship between father and son deteriorated. Due to legal troubles, John was eventually drafted into the army. He deserted after only 5 months, later telling his father that he was discharged due to illness. Upon fleeing the army in 1924, he got married and attempted to find regular employment. However, due to his 2 prior convictions, lack of skills, and incomplete education, as he didn't finish school, employers couldn't see him as a valuable employee. Dillinger never managed to secure stable employment. As often happens, when financial troubles knock on the door, love tends to fly out the window. The marriage began to crumble and Johnny decided to resort to his old ways. Along with a friend, he robbed a grocery store, but they were apprehended the very next day. His wife, understandably, immediately distanced herself from such a problem husband. However, there was one person who hadn't forgotten about Dillinger, his tyrannical father. By then, Dillinger Sr. had become a deacon in the local church, a role that perhaps spoke to his genuine character and sense of responsibility to society for his troubled son. Upon his father's recommendation, the future national hero Dillinger Jr. expressed genuine remorse for his actions. However, his heartfelt confession didn't sway the court. Considering Dillinger's status as a repeat offender and his desertion from the Army, he was sentenced to a hefty 10 years. His accomplice received only 2 years. Dillinger, of course, had his own interpretation of the situation. He believed that the injustice wasn't due to his being a moral degenerate and repeat offender, but rather because he had listened to his father, whereas his accomplice had hired a lawyer. Dillinger was actually released early, thanks to his father. Despite everything, the poor man never lost faith in his son. He spearheaded a campaign for his release and managed to gather 188 signatures on a petition. Perhaps the father could have achieved his son's early release sooner, if only the son hadn't constantly attempted to escape from prison and refused to abide by the rules while incarcerated. Almost immediately after his release in 1933, Dillinger robbed a bank in Bluffton, Ohio. Then, on September 22nd of that same year, the police arrested Dillinger once again, and he was placed back in county jail awaiting trial. This is where the film begins. Here it's worth taking a brief pause from the tragic saga of the father and his wayward son to delve into the history of bank robberies in the United States. It's commonly believed that the peak of bank robberies in the United States occurred during the Great Depression. However, the reality is slightly different. The number of bank robberies actually began to rise in the early 1920s. The main reason for this surge in thefts was technological progress. Not only did the number of bank robberies increase, but there was also a rise in smaller-scale thefts from pharmacies, stores, and various warehouses. This was due to a lack of adequate equipment for law enforcement officers, while criminals gained access to weapons like the Thompson submachine gun, capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. This firepower provided robbers with a clear advantage over the police. Additionally, the widespread adoption of automobiles, particularly Henry Ford's Model T, made planning the getaway much more convenient. Given these circumstances, it's no surprise that bank robberies became a more common criminal pursuit. However, it's important to note that the true pioneer in bank robbery tactics was not John Dillinger, but a man named Herman Lamm. Despite being surrounded by myths, one undisputed fact remains. Around 1917, while serving time in a Utah prison, Lamm devised a precise strategy for bank robbery that would forever change the game. Lamm's approach involved meticulous scouting of banks before the crime, carefully observing security measures and gathering intelligence on police response systems. Each of Lamm's robberies was carefully planned. Every member of his gang had a specific role. One would keep watch on the street. Another would be the getaway driver. A third would handle the area where bank customers were located, while the fourth would head straight to the vault for the money. However, Lamm's most significant innovation was his getaway strategy. He meticulously mapped out all possible escape routes on a road map, marking every road leading to and from the bank. Before each heist, the gang would rehearse their getaway routes in a car, timing their movements with a stopwatch and memorizing various turns to optimize their escape time. While Dillinger was behind bars, Lamm's gang carried out dozens of successful robberies in the 1920s. However, their reign came to an end in 1930 when Lamm was cornered by the police and took his own life. Lamm's method subsequently became the bank robber's Bible. Why did I bring up this guy, and what's his connection to Dillinger? Well, it turns out that two former members of Lamm's gang, Walter Dietrich and James Clark, struck up a friendship with John Dillinger back during his first prison stint in Indiana. It was from them that Dillinger learned all the tricks of bank robbery. And that's precisely why John, the youngster, caught after a measly $1.50 heist from a rundown store, emerged as a real specialist in the world of robberies. Dillinger committed his first bank robbery 3 weeks after his release. Within a month, Johnny and his accomplices had systematically robbed 2 small banks, a supermarket, a factory, and a pharmacy. During one of the robberies, Johnny made a leap over the cashier's counter in the style of his favorite actor, Douglas Fairbanks. Douglas was a star of silent cinema who, so to speak, was at the origins of cinematic parkour. After 4 months of robberies, the police managed to track down and gradually arrest almost all the gang members. This is where the movie Public Enemies begins, which tells the events from September 22, 1933 to June 22, 1934. During these 9 months, Dillinger transformed from a petty thief into the boldest bank robber in American history. The opening scene of the movie does not quite accurately depict the events that happened in reality. In the film, 2 escapes were merged into one. In reality, 8 of Dillinger's friends escaped from the Indiana State Prison using shotguns and rifles that Dillinger had managed to pass to them while still at large. Then, Dillinger was arrested. As soon as these escaped bandits learned that Dillinger had also been captured, they immediately decided to stage a raid on the prison to rescue him. Johnny had been placed in a prison in the small town of Lima, Ohio. To get into the prison, the bandits posed as police officers and demanded a meeting with the inmate Dillinger. However, the local sheriff became suspicious and asked all 3 of them to show their documents. One of the bandits, Pierpont, shot the sheriff. Taking the keys to the cells, they found Johnny in the prison and set him free. By the way, the second scene in the film depicting the chase and subsequent killing of the bank robber nicknamed Pretty Boy Floyd by the police does not accurately match the real chronological sequence of events. In reality, Pretty Boy Floyd was shot 3 months after Johnny Dillinger's death, but we'll come back to Floyd a little later. After their audacious escape, the Dillinger gang continued to rob banks in the state of Indiana. Gradually, Johnny began to gain popularity. Witnesses singled him out among the entire gang as a nimble and slender robber, with the manners of a gentleman and a carefree demeanor. The media began to feature articles about Dillinger on the front pages of newspapers, and authorities, in turn, began to pay close attention to the criminal. Interestingly, the atmosphere of the Great Depression is not particularly noticeable during the movie. Yet, when the stock market crash of 1929 escalated into an economic crisis, hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs. And it was precisely in 1933, the toughest period of the Great Depression, when Dillinger got out of prison and began robbing banks. In big cities, including Chicago, shanty towns emerged. Thousands of families abandoned their homes and took to wandering along the railways of the Midwest. People moved from city to city in search of a better life and found none. The prosperity of the Roaring Twenties had disappeared suddenly, as if after an enemy bombing. People lost all hope. Women, once dancing the night away, now lined up for meager rations. Men whose savings had evaporated after the stock market crash now sat on curbs begging for alms. In Washington, protest marches continued incessantly, sometimes ending with soldiers supported by tanks dispersing desperate, hungry people, willing to do any work for food. In all these troubles, the common people blamed the banks, and that's why those who robbed these banks were not just uncondemned but considered national heroes by the people. In the movie, Dillinger renounces crimes that could tarnish his image before the public.
Public don't like kidnapping.
Who gives a damn what the public likes?
I do. I hide out among them. You gotta care what they think.
However, in reality, the admired image of the anti-violence robber, which garnered Dillinger's support from the populace, gradually eroded. Dillinger robbed not only fat cat capitalists. Once, his gang attacked a police station to steal several rifles, revolvers, and stock up on bulletproof vests. Over time, Dillinger did cross the line and shot a policeman. This occurred during another robbery in Chicago. As the criminals were loading bags of loot into the car, patrolman Patrick O'Malley opened fire on Dillinger but missed. Enraged, Johnny retaliated and shot him dead. This incident is the only officially confirmed killing by Dillinger. Coincidence or not, it was just after Dillinger personally killed a policeman that his gang's luck began to run out. Initially, Dillinger was recognized at a doctor's appointment, and he miraculously managed to evade arrest. The car he escaped in was riddled with bullets by the police. Then, 2 members of the gang were identified by a firefighter. The true story differs slightly from what Dillinger's accomplice claimed in the film.
There's a fire in the hotel! Firemen found our guns! They called the cops!
The firefighter simply recognized the generous gentleman who didn't hesitate to pay him for saving their property during a hotel fire. Then, as a law-abiding citizen, he reported these 2 gang members to the police. Another gang member, Pierpont, became so brazen that he decided to chat with patrolmen without reason, and was subsequently recognized too. Ultimately, due to numerous slip-ups, the Indiana police successfully apprehended Dillinger and his gang. In the film, there's a conversation between Dillinger and FBI agent Melvin, in which the killing of Pretty Boy Floyd is mentioned again. In reality, as I mentioned earlier, Floyd outlived Dillinger. So, at the time of Dillinger's last arrest, Floyd was still alive. In truth, he was shot 3 months after Johnny Dillinger's death. In fact, the day after Dillinger's death, the FBI immediately dubbed Pretty Boy Floyd as Public Enemy number 1. On October 22, 1934, FBI agents led by Melvin Purvis severely wounded Floyd in the arm and abdomen during a chase. Furthermore, in reality, it wasn't Agent Melvin Purvis who fired the shots, but another officer, Chester Smith. By the way, the dialogue between Melvin Purvis and John Dillinger in prison couldn't have occurred, as Melvin didn't become involved in Dillinger's case until a later time. The Dillinger gang was split up after their arrest. Johnny was loaded onto a plane bound for Chicago, where he was facing the death penalty for the murder of a police officer. The rest were sent to Ohio, where some members of Dillinger's gang were also facing the death penalty for the murder of a sheriff during Dillinger's first prison escape. Upon landing in Chicago, Dillinger was greeted by a real convoy, just like in the movie, consisting of 85 police officers in 13 cars and 12 motorcycles. It was the epitome of the romanticized fame of a gangster and his popularity. People saw him as a folk hero, a vigilante. Thousands took to the streets hoping to catch a glimpse of their idol. A genuine press conference was held in the sheriff's office, akin to that of a movie star. Even the state prosecutor posed for a photo with Dillinger. As for the last escape from prison, there is still no consensus on exactly how Dillinger managed it. In the movie, it shows Dillinger threatening guards with a mock pistol, a version based on Dillinger's own description of the escape. Dillinger stated that a guard is not capable of noticing the difference between a real gun and a wooden replica. This version is currently published on the FBI's website. However, in the 1930s, there was another version. The prison authorities claimed that Dillinger's lawyer, with a bribe, managed to secretly smuggle real weapons to him. Nevertheless, on March 3, 1934, at 8:30 a.m., Dillinger held an object to the ribs of a guard, represented by him as a firearm, and silently ordered him to escort him to the prison arsenal. They passed through the prison kitchen, and in the arsenal, Johnny took several machine guns. One of them he gave to a fellow prisoner who was his accomplice. Holding the guard hostage, the fugitives headed for the side exit of the prison. In the movie, the escapees got into a police car near the exit of the prison. In reality, they acted even more audaciously. They walked out through a garage that was unlocked and unguarded. Then they strolled casually, as if on a leisurely walk, through the nearest neighborhood, arousing no suspicions. At the end of the block was the garage of the Ford Company. Bursting in, Dillinger forced the garage guard to give them a car and took him as a hostage. Unlike the movie, to avoid being recognized, Dillinger ordered the guard to get behind the wheel and drive them out of town. And indeed, on the way, the bandits sang songs. However, it was at this moment that Dillinger made his biggest mistake, which the film failed to mention due to chronological inconsistencies. In reality, it was only at this stage that the FBI squad under the leadership of Melvin joined the hunt for Dillinger, because Dillinger had crossed the state border in the stolen car. This crime fell under the jurisdiction of the Bureau, and Hoover took up the capture of the famous criminal.
How many have you arrested personally?
I have never arrested anybody.
You are shockingly unqualified, aren't you, sir?
And despite whatever is said about Hoover's incompetence in the movie, it was only after the FBI took up the hunt for Dillinger that they were able to get him. By the way, it was precisely after the FBI declared war on bank robbers in 1933, and then managed to win that war, that all the bandits subsequently began to treat the FBI with greater respect. After that, for any outlaw in the States, ensuring that this agency did not pursue them became all important. However, before that, FBI Director Hoover was an unknown official in an organization with a rather dubious reputation, as portrayed in the film. The FBI at that time was a small and very strange entity in terms of its functions. The Bureau's responsibilities included investigating federal crimes ranging from incitement to rebellion to tracking down stolen cars transported across state lines. FBI agents lacked the authority to make arrests, relying instead on local police assistance when necessary. Furthermore, they were prohibited from carrying firearms. FBI employees were considered more detectives than law enforcement officers. The Bureau itself, founded in 1908, steadily deteriorated over the ensuing decades and eventually became a hotbed of corruption. Trained as a lawyer, John Edgar Hoover was just 29 years old when he was appointed director of this organization. Upon assuming the position, he immediately decided to replace the agents in the field. Hoover needed young, energetic white individuals with legal backgrounds, clever, meticulous, and raised in respectable families. In other words, he required people just like himself, and Hoover found them. The employees feared him like fire. Inspections could descend upon local branches without warning, catching anyone who was even a minute late for work. Hoover couldn't stand idlers and demanded strict adherence to the new rules of conduct, which he made known to all. The slightest breach of discipline resulted in dismissal. However, the police regarded Hoover's unarmed personnel as pitiful amateurs, college kids who wanted to take over their field of work. And indeed, almost none of the new FBI recruits had experience dealing with criminals. Even Hoover himself, though positioning himself as the chief crime fighter, had never made a single arrest personally. Investigations were conducted by local office heads while Director Hoover simply issued orders. That's why there's a scene in the film where a politician, McKellar, accuses Hoover of incompetence and denies him an increase in budget for a criminal catching operation. Hoover also understood that besides the young and intelligent, the Bureau needed seasoned pros. He found them among retired police veterans. In certain cases, they were allowed to exceed their authority and carry firearms, as these individuals were adept at finding and apprehending criminals. Hoover's reforms radically transformed the FBI. Poorly performing local branches were closed. A vertical chain of command was established, and documentation was standardized. Less than 6 months after Hoover's appointment as director, the Bureau had become a modern and efficient government organization. However, by 1933 or 1934, it was not yet obvious that one should not mess with the FBI, which is why Dillinger so recklessly committed a federal crime by stealing a car. After Dillinger's escape, security measures were intensified at the Columbus, Ohio prison, where Pierpont and other members of Dillinger's gang were serving their sentences. The prison authorities feared their escape. Nevertheless, the robbers attempted to organize a breakout, but failed. One was shot dead while attempting to flee, and Pierpont bid farewell to life in the electric chair. Dillinger lost most of his accomplices, and as in the movie, many criminals began to shun him over time.
Popular.
Tells us you're bad for business.
This was because, for a criminal, fame almost always equals a death sentence. However, Dillinger's authority among felons was still relatively high, so he found a new gang. Dillinger, along with Hamilton, joined the gang led by Lester Gillis, better known as Babyface Nelson. Nelson had a reputation as the craziest and most ruthless robber. Nelson took pleasure in violence, making it challenging to deter him from using deadly force. With the new team, Dillinger's crimes became even bolder. He came up with the idea of taking hostages during bank robberies. It seems very strange, but even after Dillinger began using ordinary people as human shields, these same ordinary people continued to consider him a national hero. The scene in the movie where a photograph of Dillinger is shown on the screen before a movie showing did happen in reality. However, the movie altered it slightly. In reality, when Dillinger's photo was shown on the screen, people cheered for their hero and booed law enforcement officers, adding obscene words directed at banks, the government, Hoover, the FBI, or basically anyone except their idol. After another daring heist and a frantic chase, Dillinger found himself wounded in the leg, barely managing to evade capture. A peculiar situation unfolded. While society at large idolized Dillinger, the number of people willing to shelter him dwindled. Cornered, Johnny decided to take a desperate step, which is not portrayed in the movie. On April 5, 1934, when everyone began to distance themselves from Dillinger like the plague, guess where he returned? That's right, to the home of his elderly tyrant of a father. They forgave each other past grievances, and even arranged a secret gathering of family members and friends. The immense moral turmoil Dillinger endured to reconcile with his tyrant father is difficult to imagine. The FBI couldn't even realize that the most wanted criminal in the country would seek refuge with his father. Later on, Dillinger Sr. apologized for all his son's deeds and assured people that Johnny was falsely accused of far more crimes than he actually committed. After spending several weeks at his father's house, Dillinger decided to change his location. On April 20th, 1934, the owner of the Little Bohemia Hotel notified the police that Johnny Dillinger's gang might be hiding in his hotel. FBI agent Melvin Purvis and his team set out to apprehend the robbers, dead or alive. This episode is depicted in the film, albeit without one crucial detail. What happened there in reality would later be considered a disgrace to the FBI. When Melvin and his team arrived, they observed a group exiting the building and entering a car. What the film omits is that these individuals were not Dillinger's accomplices. Ignoring commands to halt, the occupants of the car were met with gunfire. Moments later, the agents came under fire from the building. After the chaos settled, it turned out that the people in the car were just ordinary workers, one of whom was killed on the spot. The entire gang of robbers was inside the building. Upon hearing gunshots, they returned fire from the hotel. Thanks to the darkness and the confusion among the FBI agents who were completely disoriented, the bandits managed to escape. The battle left behind the corpse of a worker and a police officer whom Babyface Nelson had killed. The agents only managed to severely wound Dillinger's associate, Hamilton. Despite the significant risk, Johnny managed to get Hamilton to a doctor. However, sepsis and wound complications had proved fatal. Dillinger buried his friend, first smearing his face and fingers with acid so he couldn't be identified. The net around Johnny was closing in. There was a $10,000 bounty on his head, and he was nearly broke because he had spent a lot of money on plastic surgery to change his face and fingerprints. This goes unmentioned in the film. Moreover, during the surgical procedure, Dillinger almost died, and he was very dissatisfied with the final results on his face. Additionally, there were huge problems with the fingerprints. The doctor decided to carefully remove the skin from the tips of his fingers with acid. Dillinger was unaware that it was impossible, as the papillary lines always regenerate in their original form. The portrayal of Johnny Dillinger's capture in the film holds a fair degree of accuracy. For those who may have missed the nuances, allow me to elaborate. Following the FBI's apprehension of Dillinger's lifelong love, Billy Frechette, who steadfastly refused to betray him even under torture, Dillinger simply found himself a new girlfriend. Together, they sought refuge in the northern districts of Chicago, securing a hideout in an apartment rented from Romanian immigrant Anna Sage. Interestingly, unlike in the film, no one attempted to coerce Anna Sage into cooperation. It was her own initiative to strike a deal with the FBI. She did so not only out of a sense of civic duty, but also to secure legal residency for her family. Soon, the Bureau received information from Anna that on the evening of July 22nd, Dillinger planned to visit the cinema with her and his girlfriend. A group of agents led by Purvis were uncertain which of the two cinemas Dillinger would choose, so they set up surveillance at both locations. Purvis also harbored doubts about the reliability of Anna's information, as the media was still talking about the recent FBI failure at the Little Bohemia, and he didn't want to risk another embarrassment. He instructed Anna to wear something distinctive to aid the agents in identifying her amidst the theater crowd. Anna's tip proved accurate as Johnny and the ladies attended a screening of Manhattan Melodrama. It was decided to apprehend Dillinger post-show, prompting him to bring additional agents from the second cinema to this one. One curious detail omitted from the film: a cinema employee mistook the suspicious individuals loitering outside for a gang of criminals and called the police. This almost foiled the entire operation, as Purvis had to convince the arriving officers that they were FBI agents conducting an operation to apprehend Johnny Dillinger. After the movie ended, and Dillinger, accompanied by the women, exited the theater, Purvis lit a cigarette, signaling his team to start the operation. Dillinger was gunned down right on the street. The agents shot Dillinger at close range without warning shots. A gunshot wound under his right eye proved fatal, though he did not die immediately but on the way to the hospital. A crowd of onlookers lingered at the scene all night long, some even dipping their handkerchiefs in his blood as mementos. Forensic experts confirmed the identity of the deceased as John Dillinger, although not everyone believed it due to his altered appearance. Rumors persisted for a long time that the country's public enemy #1 had successfully retired and left the country. Recently, in 2019, new events cast doubt on Dillinger's death. The History Channel decided to produce a documentary about the gangster's life. One storyline involved exhuming Dillinger's grave to dispel all doubts. However, the Indiana State Court prohibited the exhumation without the consent of Crown Hill Cemetery, where Dillinger is buried. The court noted that the cemetery administration was not obliged to provide compelling reasons for their refusal. Despite this court ruling, the Indiana Department of Health allowed the exhumation in July 2019. However, the administration of Crown Hill Cemetery still opposed it, citing threats to the integrity of the cemetery. The FBI also commented on the matter, stating it was simply absurd and there was no reason to doubt the official version. Do you support the opinion of ordinary Americans of the 1930s that Dillinger was a true hero of his time? Thank you for watching the video to the end. I hope you had a good time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You'll discover plenty of other captivating videos waiting for you there.